Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce you to Anita Kuno. Anita is a cloud automation and distribution engineer at HP. She works on upstream OpenStack as part of infrastructure team. She's mentored new contributors on how to develop the OpenStack infrastructure system. And yes, she's going to start talking now. So please make her welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Elizabeth. I appreciate that. The title of my talk is Wax On, Wax Off, the Tough Love Guide to Mentoring. My name, as Elizabeth said, is Anita Kuno. Why is tough love part of the title of this talk? We're going to talk about mentoring in a second, but one of the things that's really important in my approach to tough love is recognizing that in order to learn something of value, there's a process that has to be undertaken. There's a journey that someone has to go through in order to achieve something at the end of that. When I talk to other people about mentoring, some people are very shy about the tough love part of it. If you look at the slide, can people see that okay? Is it too dark? Or can we lower the front lights a little bit and maybe have less light on the projector? Are we able to do that? Room folks? We're okay? We're okay? Okay, sorry about that. If you can look at we'll just go with, I'm assuming everybody is familiar with the movie Karate Kid. We're all good with that? Okay, so I'll just go ahead not having to fill any background on Karate Kid. So we all know Daniel, right? And there's a point in the story where Daniel is extremely disillusioned, right? He thought he was getting into something, and this isn't anything like he was expecting it would be. And so he's very disappointed. But this is the tough love part, because he's learning something even though he doesn't realize he's learning it. And he has to go through a lot of hard work in order to accomplish that. And when I talk to other people about mentoring, some of them are very afraid of having the people that they're working with go through that experience, because they want to protect them from having this experience of disillusionment, of frustration, of not knowing. But for me, that's crucial to the person actually going through the journey and owning whatever they come through on the other side. So that's why tough love is part of the title of this talk, because I consider that an integral part of mentoring. I'll go with integral, although I know some people pronounce it integral, and I'll acknowledge that there's two pronunciations, and I'll just choose one for the benefit of moving along. So it's an integral part of mentoring, is helping people to have this experience of disillusionment and work through it. Why are you sitting here? I'm actually asking this question. It's not a rhetorical question. Would anybody like to share why they're in this room right now? The gentleman in the blue?
Because I've recently started tutoring and getting more into that scene, and I want to get better at it.
Okay, so the gentleman has recently started tutoring, and he would like to get better at it. Does anybody else have, how many other people would say that that's, at least in part, some of the reason of why they're sitting here? Okay, probably at least half the room. Okay, is there another reason that someone is sitting here? The gentleman behind him in the dark blue shirt?
Yeah, like at work when you hire a new developer or something like that, what's the appropriate way to level them up?
What's the appropriate way to level up a new developer at work? Okay, is there anybody else, at least in part, is sitting here for that reason? Okay, probably about 30% of the room. Okay, is there another reason that people are sitting here today? Anybody else have another reason? Okay, the gentleman down front.
Sure, so for an entire team, I'm nominally the technical lead and figuring out how to take them, once they're not brand new, to the next level.
Okay, so as a technical lead, working with a group of people, how to understand how to get them to continue to develop. Okay, anybody else in that same situation? Okay, one or two other hands. Is there anything, any motivation for anybody in the room that hasn't been covered already? Okay, Tony, go ahead.
I'm a mentee in a mentoring relationship, and I want to take best advantage of that opportunity I've been given.
Okay, so Tony right now is experiencing being a mentee in a mentoring relationship, and he'd like to better understand the relationship so that he's best able to play his role. Is that accurate? Okay, head nod from Tony. Anybody else in that same situation? Okay, show of hands, probably about maybe 15%. Okay, all right. Anybody else with another reason? Okay, gentleman down front.
We're starting to run a series of workshops in Melbourne to get people to make their first contributions for free software. And I'm hoping, I don't want it to be a bad experience for people to come on.
Wonderful. Okay, so trying to get an understanding of how to create a good first experience for new contributors. Would that be an accurate way of saying it? Anybody else? Okay, a couple other hands. All right. I think that there's probably a few more reasons why people are sitting here, but let's move on. And thank you very much for everyone for sharing why you are here. Who am I? Elizabeth told you a little bit about who I am. I work with HP, I work on OpenStack, I work on the infrastructure team. Before I started working with OpenStack, I have a varied background. I've done a lot of working with people in swimming lessons, yoga, health-related things. I am an acupuncturist, personal understanding. I am an astrologer. So I take all of these things and apply them wherever I am. And I find that I learn best by teaching. So reading a set of instructions doesn't do me any good, but I really learn when I am trying to help somebody understand how to accomplish their goal. That's a learning experience for me. So that's who I am. That's why I'm here. What is mentoring? So when we use the word mentor or mentoring, does anybody have a personal definition of mentoring? When they use that word, have you ever thought about what that definition means for you? Do you have a definition? Anybody in the room? Care to share? Okay, well, hopefully, through the course of this talk, you will think a little bit about what your definition of mentoring is. I'll share my definition, and you're welcome to try that on and see if that works for you. But in a mentoring relationship, mentoring is not about telling anybody anything. It's about guiding them so that they find what works for them. So in that vein, I'll share what works for me and encourage and support you, if I can, to the extent that I'm able, to find your own definition for mentoring, for what works for you. My definition of mentoring is holding a vision of achieving a goal for someone else long enough until they are able to hold that vision for themselves. So that's my personal vision of mentoring. And to be honest with you, I didn't know that that was my personal vision in those words until I watched Karate Kid probably about 15 times and put the slides together for this talk. So thank you for allowing me to do the research so that I was able to put that in words. So holding a vision of success for someone is a one-on-one activity. Who was at this morning's keynote? Wonderful. Wasn't it a fabulous keynote? Thank you. Thank you. I'm sorry, I've forgotten your name. It's Carrie Ann. I beg your pardon, Carrie Ann. Thank you very much for a wonderful keynote this morning. Carrie Ann was talking about education and teaching, which is very, very important. And education and teaching is something that when you take a look at, when you're talking about it, you're looking at influencing a large number of people and creating ways and evaluating and making decisions about curriculum, about when things are going to be introduced, and hopefully changing syntax, capitalization, naming, so that the students are better able to achieve their goal. Very, very valuable, not mentoring. Mentoring is a one-on-one experience. Teaching is about, and setting curriculum, especially education, is working on setting up an environment so that as many people as possible can have success. So changing the environment. Mentoring is about helping the student to change themselves. Recognizing that there are certain things in the environment which cannot be changed. Gravity, for instance, is an example and was used in the movie. The force of water and tide and so on. And by mentoring, you're helping people to accept what is not able to be changed outside of themselves so that they can have a different perspective inside of themselves. And that is a very, very difficult journey to take, and it's also very individual. And why I say my vision of, or my definition of mentoring is holding a vision. Because if I hold a vision, I know what it looks like when we're finished, and I know what it looks like when we're not finished. And I don't care about anything else that takes place in the middle. We'll talk, it's not that I'm dismissing it, but it's just, are we there yet? Are we not there yet? Do we still have work? Do we not have work to do? How many people in the room have climbed a mountain? Okay, great. So probably about 45% of people have climbed a mountain. So when you're climbing a mountain, how do you know when there's more mountain to climb? Right, you can see it. Okay, so you look up, look, more mountain. How do you know when you're finished climbing a mountain? Anybody want to say? How would you describe it? I'm finished climbing the mountain. How do you know? Go ahead.
You're above everything else. You can see down.
That's right. You're above everything else. You look up, there's no more up, right? Everything else is down below you. And it's the same thing when you're holding a vision. If you've got the vision, are you there yet? No. Well, then you've got more work to do. So that basically is my vision of mentoring. So qualities of a mentor. So we're going to take a look at just a few. This is not an exhaustive list. Hopefully this motivates you to take a look at what you consider to be qualities of a mentor and add and edit as you see fit so that you have your own list. These are some of the qualities of a mentor which I consider important, and fortunately also were illustrated in the movie, so we have some nice screenshots. One of the first qualities of a mentor is listening. Mentoring is 95% listening. You are there to help someone else to find their way. You telling them what your way is actually distracts them from finding their way. By listening and learning how to listen, which is different than hearing. I can hear a train whistle, I can hear a bus. But listening, what is someone telling me? And what are they not telling me? We've been talking for 10 minutes. What have they absolutely avoided saying? And why? So they have a reason for doing that. And I can choose to support them to have that reason, and then when they're ready, they can share that with me. They're not ready yet, but I'm hearing that they're not ready to share something with me. And I honor that space, so that allows them to explore that. So listening, very, very important. And listening is a learned skill. Some people will think you either can listen or you can't listen, and that's all that there is to it. And that's absolutely wrong. Listening is a learned skill. People can learn how to listen. If you need resources, there are few, but there are some available on the internet. But if you would like to find out about resources for learning how to listen, you're more than welcome to talk to me after the talk. I'm also here for the rest of the conference and for the 2 sprint days. So, one of the qualities that I feel is very important for a mentor is enforcing boundaries. So we'll just go through a little scenario in the movie. So when we first meet Mr. Miyagi, Daniel goes looking for Mr. Miyagi because the faucet is spraying water all over the apartment. And so Mr. Miyagi has his back to Daniel, and he is practicing in his workshop. Daniel opens the door uninvited to ask him, whoops, we've gotten the mouse on Daniel's nose, to ask him about fixing the faucet, and Mr. Miyagi turns around and looks at him. Daniel closes the door and stands on the other side, and Mr. Miyagi goes back to practicing. So this little snippet shows that it's very, very important for the mentor to respect their own boundaries and to ensure that the mentee or student also learns to respect those same boundaries. If the mentor has very well-defined boundaries and the student learns to respect them, then when the student is developing and demonstrating what their boundaries are and enforcing their boundaries, then the mentor also can respect them. Does that make sense to everybody? Yes? Okay. Any questions about that? We're unsure of what that point is? There'll be time for questions again at the end. Okay, so we'll move on for now. Okay? This is another quality that I consider very important in a mentor, and that's expecting honesty. This screenshot is from a part in the movie. Daniel has been beaten up. Mr. Miyagi comes in to fix the faucet and asks Daniel, "What happened to your eye?" Daniel says, "I fell off your bike." Mr. Miyagi observes, "Isn't that interesting? You didn't hurt your hands." And this is the look Daniel gives him. Part of being a good mentor is calling a lie when you see it. That can create tension. That can create discomfort. If people offer you a lie, they expect you to accept it. But if you're going to create a relationship of trust where someone is going to trust your vision of success that you hold for them, they also have to recognize that you expect them to be honest with you. Another quality in a mentor is offering kindness. So we'll go through this little vignette in the movie. Daniel has a bike, is riding his bike, forced off a hill, falls down a steep grade, hurts himself, throws the bike into the dumpster, is very upset. His mother arrives home from work at the same time. They have a quarrel outside. Daniel says he never wanted to come to California in the first place. Can't we just go home? I don't understand the rules here. Mr. Miyagi overhears all of this because it's right outside of his workshop. We have a shot of Mr. Miyagi acknowledging that he heard what happened. And the result is he fishes the bike out of the dumpster, fixes it and cleans it for Daniel and puts it outside of his apartment. Nobody asked him to do this. Daniel didn't expect him to do this. He did it because he recognized that somebody needed something to demonstrate that he was a valued person. He was feeling unvalued, he was feeling confused, he was feeling angry, and so Mr. Miyagi did this of his own volition. When you're mentoring, there are going to be times where you see someone as a potential candidate to be mentored and they disagree. They're not ready, they're not willing to do that. And so there will be times where you offer kindness and it is not accepted. Or you offer kindness and people just take it and don't offer anything back. And that just happens. Because what you're looking for is you're looking for people who express gratitude. And the only way that you're going to find the people who express gratitude to your act of kindness is by offering acts of kindness to random people for no reason. So when someone actually does come to you and say, "Thank you for that kind thing that you did for me," acknowledging that act of kindness, that gratitude, is a very important thing for a mentor to be able to do. So in this scene, this is just after Daniel has come home. comes home, he sees the bike. He remembers it left in the dumpster. There it is outside of his apartment, all clean and polished. And he goes and he finds Mr. Miyagi and he says thank you. And then Mr. Miyagi spends some time with him and teaches him about bonsai trees. Qualities of a student. When I say these next few, these are not intrinsic qualities in the individual. These are qualities that the person happens to be experiencing at that point in time in their lives, which makes a mentorship relationship possible. When I go through these next qualities, it may be perceived that this person is a loser at this period of time, but that's not the case. Somebody needs to be failing at something in their life that they expected to succeed in order for them to be open and receptive to receiving any help. If Daniel didn't need any help, if he moved to California and he had friends at school and he wasn't getting beaten up and everything was wonderful, then he would never be motivated to spend time with Mr. Miyagi and learn balance and self-respect while being able to perform karate. So these sorts of qualities are something that all of us experience at various times in our lives, because it's something that indicates that we need to level up in some area. I have a paradigm that I use. I use the paradigm of a video game. So on the first level, you learn all the rules about punching and jumping and leaping and collecting coins, and you got all the rules down. And then you move on to the next level. None of those rules work. You have to learn all new rules. And so each of us in our lives will reach a level of proficiency with family or relationships or finances or work or neighbors or something. And then all of a sudden you wake up in the morning and none of those rules work. And it's because you have leveled up. You're now on a new level. And so running and leaping and doing all the other things, you have to learn a whole new set of rules, which is what Daniel is experiencing in the movie. So Daniel is having an unfamiliar experience. He employs methods for trying to deal with his unfamiliar experience. So he's full of hope when he goes to the dojo, and unfortunately he encounters his nemesis, which leads to his disappointment. So he's trying to solve this situation for himself, and he keeps running up into against blockages and obstacles. He has unexpected results of action. So if he's doing specific things that he thought they would go a certain way, all of a sudden they're not working for him anymore. Again, doesn't mean that this individual is labeled a loser. It just means that they're in a situation where they need to change their understanding of the rules. In order to have a relationship between a mentor and mentee or mentor and student, you have to have an agreement. What are some of the qualities of the agreement? Again, please use this as motivation to find out what your own definition of qualities of agreement is. One is, what's the motivation? This is the scene where Daniel asks Mr. Miyagi, please teach me. And Mr. Miyagi says, why? What's your motivation? Why should I teach you? And Daniel says, revenge. And Mr. Miyagi says, well, if that's your motivation, just start by digging 2 graves. Because revenge is a very, very poor motivation. Throughout the movie, Mr. Miyagi talks about self-respect. If you have self-respect, you have a good fight, then doesn't matter if you win or you lose, people will respect you because you respect yourself. Mr. Miyagi also talks about balance during the movie. Those are better motivators and better goals than revenge. So whatever the motivation is for the agreement, make sure that it's well stated and agreed to by both parties. If you've got a motivation that just doesn't seem to work for you, don't take the agreement. Being able to hold a vision. I spoke about that earlier. This is the scene where Mr. Miyagi is helping Daniel to hold a vision of a tree that he is about to work with and trim as a bonsai tree. And so he's helping them to hold a vision so that when he looks at the tree, he sees the finished tree, and just you continue to trim the tree until it looks exactly like the picture that you're holding. Protecting a safe space. One of the things that you have to do as a mentor is being able to hold and protect a safe space for your mentee. Part of their learning process is falling down and making mistakes, making a fool of themselves. There are people in the world who will try to take advantage of that. And it's your job as mentee to protect that space so that they can learn from falling down, pick themselves back up, and continue to climb whatever mountain it is that they're climbing and that you're helping them to do. So this scene in the movie is Mr. Miyagi negotiating some safe space so that Daniel can spend 2 months to train for the tournament. You also have to be able to follow through. So whatever skills, whatever qualities that the person is coming to you to learn, you have to be able to have the proficiency that you can follow through, and you actually can transfer those skills to that person so that if they're at least holding up their end, they have a chance of acquiring those skills. And this is the scene in the movie where Daniel has been working with Mr. Miyagi and finally realizes that he knows much more than he realized he knew. So we start with washing and waxing the cars. So this is wax on, wax off. Sanding the floor, painting the fence, and painting the house. So for 4 days, Daniel has been doing manual labor and feels that he's been used as a slave and been doing nothing but help Mr. Miyagi with some chores around the house. And Daniel decides he's going to rage quit, and he heads off. Mr. Miyagi insists that he turn around and come back. Daniel says he can't because he can't show him anything because his shoulder hurts. And Mr. Miyagi helps him to heal his shoulder so that he can continue. And he shows him the basic moves, and then he shows them that he actually can do something. He can block. And then they go through a series of blocks. And then Mr. Miyagi says, come back tomorrow. And Daniel doesn't realize the extent of what he learned until he's shown. And that's my talk. Thank you very much for your time.
Oh, thank you very much, Anita. Did anyone have any questions while I'm down there? Okay.
Yeah, I do have potentially a bit of a wide-ranging question. I was just reflecting on your comments as they relate to the leaky pipeline and women in programming and different learning styles between individuals, whether it's between genders or just between different kinds of individual, and the difficulties of forming relationships with people who are maybe a bit different in any respect regarding your learning style and how you go through that.
Sure. Actually, I'm glad that you asked the question about learning styles. My mother was an educator. There's a lot of educators and principals principals of schools in my family. And one of the things that I have learned is that if you were to take a look at learning styles, there's a school called Aerosmith, which operates in North America, primarily in Canada. And when they do an evaluation, there are 24 different fields that they acknowledge in terms of how people learn. There's kinesthetic, sound, visual, tracing. They deal specifically with learning disabilities. In their definition, every single one of us is disabled in one of those 24 criteria. It isn't acknowledged in a school system as having a learning disability until someone is weak in several areas, usually somewhere in the area of more than 5, such that they're unable to compensate. So the question is, how do you develop a relationship and deliver material in such a way that it fits the learning style of the person who's receiving it, even though it may not be the learning style of the person who's giving it. Is that an accurate reflection of the question? Okay, so I'm getting a head nod. And that would be practice, observation, research, experience, intuition, and again going back to the idea of holding the vision and continuing to try things, because in a relationship both people are learning something, right? This is the first time Mr. Miyagi is working with Daniel, so he's learning about how Daniel learns as well as Daniel's learning karate. So continuing to hold that vision and just continuing to try things until you recognize that you're moving up the mountain somehow. I hope that it wasn't taken as a way of dismissing your question, because I actually think it's a very good question. Did that provide anything of any use to you?
I thought it was broadly the right answer.
Okay.
I did start my reflection particularly about the leaky pipeline and women in programming, because that's been like a long thorn in the side.
Sure. I'm not familiar with the phrase the leaky pipeline. Does somebody have a definition of the leaky pipeline?
So the concept of the leaky pipeline is that if you look at the rates, and I'm only talking about women in programming because it's the familiar example for me.
Sure, yep.
There are many kinds of leaky pipeline, but there are a relatively small representation of women by the time you're looking at professionalised software engineers,
yes,
and a relatively large number of women in the community in general. The question is, why is that the case? And generally people find that at every stage, from original intake into interest in technology through to the relative end game of professional software engineer or other technical area, the number essentially reduces.
Right.
So the leaky pipeline refers to the fact that there are leaks at all stages,
right,
through to the end game.
Right.
And as someone who is occasionally in a mentoring position, I wanted to understand the dynamics of that and be as good as mentor I can to try to tighten up the leaks or anything along those
Wonderful.
lines. So that was
and I fully support that as a goal. I have not looked at the data, so I can't speak as any kind of expert in the field. I can speak to my own personal experience, and I can speak from what I have looked at. And the things that I have read, expectations of the people around me have a large influence on what I am able to accomplish. And I select who I work with. I selected my boss. And I select who I spend time with. And I select people who have an expectation of me that is involved in me being successful, effective, happy, at least the majority of the time. And I do encounter people who have expectations of me of stepping back, of making room for others, of being quiet because I don't have scientific references for what I have to say. Some people get very upset by the fact that I'm an acupuncturist and an astrologer and I work in energy medicine. They get very upset by that. And that is fine. They are allowed to get upset by that. When I spend time doing my work, I choose to spend time with people who have expectations of me which are in line with my successful expectations of myself. Is that a reasonable and helpful answer? Okay.
Sorry.
That's
Anita,
I think we are at time.
Yes, so any further questions, as Anita said, she'll be around for the next few days here at PyCon, and you'd be able to approach her.
Sure. And I didn't, I kind of liked this slide, and I thought I could stick my email up there, but then that kind of ruins the effect. So my email, if anybody does want to email me, is my IRC nickname, which is ANTEAYA@ANTEAYA.info. So you're welcome to email me there, and I'm sure if you were to look for Anita Kuno via the Googles, then that email would pop up as well. Thank you very much for your kind attention. I really appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of the conference.